Writing Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers to hear that words have voices.
Hello everyone, I'm Teresa Miller and welcome to Writing Out Loud. Our very special guest today is Dr. Andrew Weil. The New York Times calls him America's best known doctor. Thanks for being here, Dr. Weil.
Happy to be here.
You got your medical degree at Harvard.
I did.
When did you first become interested in alternative medicine?
Actually, long before I went to medical school.
Really?
I have a lifelong interest in plants, which is something I got from my mother that she got from her mother. That led me to be a botany major as an undergraduate and started me on a career interest in medicinal plants. I was fascinated by mind-body interactions while I was still in high school. I began reading about alternative medicine when I was in college. So really all these interests predated going to medical school.
Who were some of the physicians and healers you looked to as mentors?
You know, I think my most important mentor was an old osteopath, an old-time DO. I met him when he was in his 80s, Robert Fulford. He worked mostly with kids at that point, and he was a master of cranial therapy. He used only hands-on manipulation, and he is the most powerful healer I've ever met. And he would often say, you know, he was so good, people would say, when should I come back? He said, well, you don't have to come back. You know, I fixed it. And he said, you just make these adjustments and let old Mother Nature do her work. I mean, he was a real believer in that healing was rooted in nature and that the body wanted to be in a healthy place. He placed a great deal of emphasis on breathing, but watching him work was quite remarkable.
While you were at Harvard, it was during the tenure of Dr. Timothy Leary.
It was.
A controversial figure. What do you see as his major contributions?
Well, you know, when he and his associate Richard Alpert got dismissed from Harvard, Alpert got fired, Leary left, it was front page news in the New York Times. And that, I think, really brought these psychedelic drugs to national attention and really exploded them into the popular culture. Now, interestingly, in 2012, there is more research going on with these drugs than ever, and they're being looked at for everything from the treatment of obsessive compulsive disorder to post-traumatic stress disorder. I think there's great potential there, and really I suppose we have Leary to thank for making people aware of them.
Well, and more states are legalizing medicinal marijuana. Your thoughts?
Marijuana is one of the least, probably the least toxic pharmacological agent known. It's much less toxic than the drugs we use in medicine today. So that alone is reason to look for ways to use it. There have been these traditional uses over the years for the treatment of glaucoma and nausea associated with chemotherapy, but now we're finding that receptors for the endocannabinoids, these compounds in marijuana, are throughout the body, and they're an ancient part of our body's defenses. There's a very interesting research going on showing that marijuana and its derivatives can both prevent and treat many kinds of cancer. They may treat seizure disorders. They may prevent dementia. So there's active research, and it seems to me that it's just silly that we've denied ourselves the use of this agent in medicine.
Earlier I used the term alternative medicine. Your focus is on integrated medicine.
Yes, which is not simply combining conventional and alternative medicine. Integrative medicine has very big philosophical points to it. The first is to restore the focus of medicine on health and healing instead of just managing disease. Secondly, we look at patients as more than just physical bodies. You know, we are mental, emotional beings, spiritual entities, community members. Those other dimensions of human life have to be taken into account. Third, we place a great deal of emphasis on lifestyle, on all aspects of lifestyle, how people eat, how they exercise, how they rest, sleep, so forth. We see the practitioner-patient relationship as being central to the healing process. And for that reason, I think that this modern era of for-profit medicine, where doctors have such limited time to see patients, has really destroyed that relationship and I think hurt medicine very badly. And finally, we are willing to look around the world and through all cultures for treatments that we believe are useful and to bring those into mainstream medicine.
I want to talk about the evolving role of doctors in our society right now, because I had a friend who was ill recently and she's in the hospital, but her doctor doesn't come to see her. It's a hospitalist, and she feels totally disconnected.
Right.
What can we do about those sorts of situations?
We have to change medicine.
How do we do that?
Well, we're not going to. It's not going to come from our politicians and our elected officials. The vested interests that are making enormous amounts of money from the current dysfunctional health system don't want anything to change, and they have total control of our legislators. I think the only way this will change is through a grassroots movement. If enough people understand the situation, become angry about it, and elect different kinds of representatives. So that's a long-range process, but that's what we have to do.
Well, ultimately, are we going to have to assume more responsibility for our own health care?
Of course. I mean, I think health is an individual responsibility. But it would be great if we had doctors who were teachers and guides. The word doctor comes from the Latin word for teacher. And I've always felt that the role of a doctor should be to teach people how not to get sick in the first place, how to live correctly to reduce your risks of disease.
How much disease could we forestall by using?
Oh, I think a tremendous amount. The vast majority of disease that we are trying to manage in our current healthcare system is lifestyle related and therefore preventable. And if people early enough in life had made better choices about how to eat, how to exercise, how to handle stress, a lot could be done. The big diseases of aging, the diseases that become more frequent after the age of 60, cardiovascular disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, the neurodegenerative diseases. I think that all of these, that the risks of these can be reduced and the onset can be delayed by attending to lifestyle.
When you talk about Alzheimer's, for example, what can we do to prevent Alzheimer's?
Alzheimer's begins as an inflammatory condition in the brain, so anything you can do to reduce or control inappropriate inflammation is going to give you an edge. That can include things like taking ibuprofen in low doses. It can include eating more turmeric, the yellow spice, which is the most potent natural anti-inflammatory agent known, following my anti-inflammatory diet, which I've designed and put out there for people to use. I think also exercising your brain in the way that you exercise your body. And that can be everything from doing crossword puzzles and playing cards to making the attempt to learn another language.
As we assume, Dr. Weil, more and more responsibility for our own health care, I've got to say that I often rely on the internet. I go to the internet and I'm overwhelmed with choices. How do we make smart decisions?
Well, I have to say, I think the internet has been a generally good force. I mean, I'm aware there's a lot of misinformation out there and some disinformation, but I have seen innumerable patients in the past 5 years who were faced with very difficult medical decisions who got exactly what they needed on the internet. But to do that, I think you've got to be a wise user. You've got to seek out reliable sources of information. And I don't know how to tell you to do that except to rely on the advice of others, to seek out trusted sites, to names that have good associations.
You've got a great website.
I do, drweil.com, and I try very hard to make sure that the information out there is current. I change it as research evolves, and I refer people to other sites as well.
And you've made such a difference in so many people's lives. It's got to be very gratifying.
It is very gratifying. I have an awful lot of people stop me when I'm out and say that, this has changed my life, or I got just what I needed from one of your books. Yes, that makes me very happy. I feel I'm doing what I'm supposed to do.
Is it overwhelming, though, sometimes? Because I'm sure whenever you travel that people come to you with their medical problems and they're wanting help.
I have to say that the vast majority of people who stop me in public just want to thank me for my work. They're very nice people. I have no complaints about that.
I told you a story before we started taping, and you remembered part of it, but a friend of mine in New York knew you several years ago, and her mother became very, very seriously ill, had a terrible prognosis, and even though it went against her grain, she called you. She didn't want to take advantage of you for advice, and you gave her advice, and she said, and her mother responded so well, she's still alive today.
I'm happy to do that, and in many cases, it's just using common sense, and unfortunately there is too little of that in medicine today.
And that's hard to believe, isn't it?
It is.
Among all these well-educated people. Why is it, Dr. Weil, that some people are dismissive of healthy lifestyles and think of them as boring, and we know they're not, but why is there that misconception?
Well, I think many people imagine that to follow a healthy lifestyle means giving up everything you like, and that's absolutely not true. I think that when you make these healthy choices, you start to feel better, and that becomes motivation to continue. For instance, if you look at eating, I've spent a lot of my life trying to convince people that food that's good for you and food that's delicious can be one and the same. But I think you don't believe that unless you've had that experience. We've all been served dreadful food that we've been told is healthy.
Yes, and that leads us right into the discussion of this wonderful new book of yours, True Food. And I also want you to talk a little bit about the True Food Kitchens.
I will. Several years ago, a mutual friend introduced me to a successful restaurateur in Arizona, Sam Fox. And I suggested to him the concept of a restaurant that would serve really wonderful food that adhered to good nutritional guidelines. He didn't get it. He said health food won't sell. And I think he thought I meant just tofu and sprouts. I invited him and his wife to my home for dinner. I cooked for them. He liked the food. His wheels started turning. He was very skeptical, but he said he was willing to give it a try. So we opened a first True Food Kitchen in Phoenix almost 4 years ago. And from the moment, it was just when the economy went south and everyone said we were totally crazy. But from the moment the restaurant opened its doors, it's been very successful. At the beginning, Sam said, well, you can't judge a new restaurant because people are going to come to a new restaurant. In the second month, he said, well, it doesn't mean anything. Third month, it was overwhelmingly busy, so I still can't draw any conclusions from this. By 6 months, he said he'd never seen anything like this. He said he'd never had people come up on the street and hug him for opening a restaurant, or begging him to open one of these in all places in the country. We now have 6 of them. We have 2 in Arizona, 3 in Southern California. We just opened one in Denver. We are hoping to open these throughout the country. I mean, they're fabulous. They're moderately priced. They accommodate everyone. Vegans can eat there, vegetarians, meat eaters, people who are gluten-free. We have something for everybody, but it's really, really good food, and people feel good when they eat there. Another thing that Sam said he's never had happen at a restaurant he's opened, he's got 40-some restaurants, is that people eat there 5 and 6 times a week because they feel good when they eat there. So I've put a lot of the recipes from the restaurant into this book, and there's a lot of recipes in the book that aren't yet in the restaurant.
Well, and I want you to get behind this term true food.
Yeah.
That resonates in a lot of different ways.
It means real food, as close to the way nature produces it as possible, and as far as possible from the industrial food-like substances which increasingly dominate our stores and restaurants. If I go into a convenience store in this country, if I'm lucky, I can find a bag of dry roasted peanuts that don't have MSG in them. Otherwise it's the bright blue slush going around in the thing. And almost everything I pick up off the shelf has ingredients in it that I won't eat. It's not real food. So I think this is getting back to basics. It's simple food, simply prepared, that emphasize fresh, top quality ingredients, bold flavors. And these are not difficult recipes to make, and I'd love to see people get back in the kitchen and do more cooking.
You used an interesting phrase last night, talking about people having a relationship with their food. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think first of all, it means knowing where your food came from, and recognizing it as food and knowing how it's produced, so you have some sense of that. I think when we eat fast food, junk food, highly processed food, we have no idea how this got from wherever it came from to the package that it's in.
Why are we more concerned about what we put into our cars than what we put into our bodies?
Good point. Also, I think many people pay more attention to the health of their cars than their bodies. If a warning light comes on, we take it into the mechanic.
Exactly.
And I think a lot of people don't do that with their bodies, and bodies are infinitely more valuable and important than cars. I think this is a matter of education, and I don't think we do a great job at health education. What I got as health education growing up was pretty silly. It was taught by physical education teachers that had no interest in the subject matter. It was very moralistic. Don't do this. I think we could design real health education courses, K through 12, that would be very effective. And one way to do this, I've suggested this in one of my books, is to take advantage of the new video game technologies that are out there.
Great idea.
In which you could really model health and show people the consequences of making various decisions. I think that would be very innovative to do that.
What's your idea of a perfect meal?
Well, I think a perfect meal should, first of all, look beautiful and taste delicious and leave you feeling good. And it should have a proper mix of carbohydrate, fat, and protein. I'm not afraid of fat. Fat is not bad for you. You need the right kinds. The ingredients should be fresh and tasty. When I'm a good home cook, and I've always cooked. Cooking is relaxing for me. It's a meditation, and I make very good food. And when I serve people, one of the things I notice is that often conversation stops, and people just concentrate on the experience of the food. That to me is a sign of really good food. When you go to countries like Italy and France, where food is so much better than it is here, you see people in a very different relationship with food. They appreciate it. They take time to appreciate it. You're not rushed out of restaurants. They're not hung up about getting pleasure from food. They're not overly concerned about the nutritional content of food. They just like it. And I'm very impressed. I drove some in Italy a couple of years ago, and the rest stops on the freeways there's wonderful food. You know, you can get first-class salads with extra virgin olive oil and balsamic vinegar, wonderful prepared food. You know, it just makes you realize how deprived we are here.
What role should our government play in regulating diet?
Well, it certainly shouldn't make it harder for people to make the right choices. You know, at the moment, our federal government subsidizes commodity crops like corn and soy, and as a result, derivatives of those crops like high fructose corn syrup and refined soybean oil are very cheap. They're very unhealthy also, and they're one of the reasons why fast food and junk food is cheap. We've made the unhealthiest food cheapest and most available. People eat what's cheap and most available. There are no subsidies for fruits and vegetables. So, you know, it's fine to have the government and the First Lady tell us that we should be eating more vegetables and we should be eating better, but if at the other hand of the government is making it harder for people to do that, that doesn't work. So I think the government should be a force for making it easier for people to make better lifestyle choices.
If you could be Surgeon General for just a day, what would be your first order of business?
I would really work to make sugary drinks disappear from our world.
You wouldn't be very popular,
No,
would
I
you?
wouldn't be very popular at all. I'd probably get canned. But if there's one thing I'd focus on, it's that. It's soda, not only soda, but all sweetened drinks. People don't need to be consuming these. They're a major force in driving childhood obesity and type 2 diabetes. And any way we could do that, I would ban advertising of them. I would ban vending machines. I'd put taxes on them. No, that would not be popular at all. But I think that's something we've got to work on. A few years ago, the Defense Department said that the pool of acceptable applicants for military service is now threatened by the obesity epidemic in young people. So if it's gotten to the level of being a threat to national security, I think we have to be willing to make some of these changes.
Oh, of course. It's startling, really. I hadn't heard that.
Yeah.
It's startling. I also want to touch on your book, Spontaneous
Yes.
Happiness. How do you define happiness?
Well, let me say first that the word happiness comes from a root that means luck or fortune. And I think throughout history, many people have equated happiness with external circumstances. And I don't think that's a good way to think about it. Most people that I talk to imagine they'll be happy if they get something that they now don't have, a new car, a better job. I think it's much better to strive for contentment, which to me is an inner sense of fulfillment that's relatively independent of external circumstances. And I think you can work on that. There are things you can do. I think also we're not supposed to be happy all the time. You know, moods are supposed to vary. They're not supposed to vary so much that they incapacitate you, and you're not supposed to get stuck on the bottom. But just as there's cloudy days and sunny days, we're supposed to have, you know, periods of elevated mood and periods of depressed mood. That's normal. I think the pharmaceutical companies have been very effective at convincing people that ordinary states of sadness are matters of unbalanced brain chemistry that require drug treatment. And I think that's a very dangerous idea.
Well, you reference in the book what you call epidemic of depression.
Right. Now, this is, you know, as some of this is manufactured by the pharmaceutical companies. But if you take that away, I don't know what percentage that is, but if you take that away, we're still left with a lot of depression and anxiety to explain. When I ask ordinary people why they think so many of us are depressed today, common answers I get are, well, look at the economy or look at the state of the world. My parents lived through the Great Depression, which make this look pretty tame, and they lived through World War II, which is probably the most horrific human experience on record. And all indications are that mental and emotional health were much better in America in those periods. So I don't think you can blame it on that. I think, in a nutshell, the problem is that the life that our genes prepared us for and the life that most of us live today are very different. We are disconnected from nature. We're not getting enough physical activity. We're eating these synthetic processed diets. We're subjected to an unprecedented amount of information overload and all the effects of these new technologies, which I think are affecting brain function. A very important factor, I think, is increasing social isolation. There's a lot of medical research showing that social connectedness protects emotional well-being. And one I can observe in my lifetime, this a dramatic increase in social isolation in our culture. You know, there are statistics showing that if a really quite phenomenal percentage of us don't even know our neighbors anymore. That's a big change from when I was growing up. And I think it's now much easier to interact with people virtually than really. And I think that's a major factor in what's going on.
Your book actually includes an 8-week program for optimal emotional well-being. Share some of the highlights with us.
Well, it starts with the anti-inflammatory diet, and this is the way of eating that I recommend for general health and longevity, but there's a very interesting connection that's been found with depression. It may be that depression is another manifestation of an inflammatory state in the body. There's even suggestions now of trying anti-inflammatory drugs as novel treatments for major depression. The mainstream diet is strongly pro-inflammatory. It gives us the wrong kinds of fats, the wrong kinds of carbohydrates, and not enough of the protective elements that are mostly in fruits, vegetables, herbs, spices. On the physical level, the best evidence we have for prevention and treatment of depression, first is for physical activity. Exercise has everything to recommend it. And secondly, for supplemental fish oil, which is the source of omega-3 fatty acids that are very deficient in the mainstream diet, strong influences on mental health and well-being. It's also worth getting your vitamin D levels checked, and I think everyone should take 2,000 IU of vitamin D a day. That's very protective of mental health as well as bones. So that's physical stuff. On the mental, emotional level, I think there's a lot of choices of things to do. One is using some of the new forms of Western psychotherapy, especially cognitive behavioral therapy, which I think is a great innovation. It's much more time efficient and cost efficient than older forms of psychotherapy. From Eastern psychology, the very strong suggestion is that it's useful to learn to focus our attention and practice keeping our attention in the present moment. This is often called mindfulness. And that can be done through various kinds of training, various kinds of meditation. But when consciousness is scattered, especially into the past and future, I think this really leaves us vulnerable to emotional ill health. So those are some things. And then I also give a number of suggestions of what I call spiritual interventions.
Yes,
and this includes everything from listening to music that elevates your spirits, to keeping fresh flowers in the home, to connecting with companion animals and pets. I was quite surprised when I did research for this book about the amount of evidence we have for the power of gratitude to affect mood. There's two aspects to this. One is feeling grateful, and the other is expressing it. There's a simple exercise from the field of positive psychology called keeping a gratitude journal. You get a little notebook that you dedicate to this purpose, keep it by your bedside. During the day, make mental notes of things you have to be grateful for, which could be as simple as the sun rising, seeing a beautiful sight, someone in your life. When you get into bed at night, you just jot these down. Doing this for 1 week has been shown to boost mood for up to several months. I mean, that's remarkable.
It's so easy to do.
And there's nothing in the way of it. There's also a great deal of research on the power of forgiveness to affect mood. But forgiveness is tricky. There's a lot of things that get in the way of that. But with gratitude, it's just a matter of remembering to do it.
When you write a book like this, Dr. Weil, does it change you too?
It did, actually. I wrote in this book that in my, especially in my 30s and 40s, I had mild to moderate depression. And a lot of what I learned in managing that, I've put into the book. I never used antidepressant drugs. They didn't agree with me. But I experimented with various natural remedies, and I tried all these interventions. But in the course of writing this book, I became happier. And many of my friends noted that I am much happier now than I've ever been at other points in my life. And I think some of it was from writing that book.
You seem to be such a together person, and of course you are. What are the misconceptions about you, though? Do you have some of the same anxieties and challenges
Sure.
the rest of us do?
Of course. I mean, first of all, you imagine taking on the task of reforming medical education and dealing with the whole medical culture out there. That's not so easy. I often get, labeled a quack, or the other one is called the guru of alternative medicine. I'm not a guru. I'm a doctor and a teacher, and I'm not an uncritical advocate of alternative medicine. I think that's a very mixed bag of ideas and practices that range from wise and worth incorporating into our system to others that are foolish and some that are dangerous. So, I don't like being seen that way.
In 2005, Time magazine named you as one of the most influential people in the world. That's a powerful platform. What's the most important message you want to get across to people?
I think the most important message is that health is your birthright. I mean, that health is a state of balance and wholeness that allows you to move through the world and not get hurt by all the things that have the potential to hurt you. It's a kind of inner resilience. But it's up to you to learn how to protect and enhance that as you go through life. And it's not hard. It's not complicated. The principles of healthy eating are fairly simple. The principles of moving your body every day, getting physical activity every day, that's pretty simple. Making sure you get good rest and sleep. Practicing some simple methods of neutralizing stress. This is not hard.
We just have a few seconds left, and I've got to ask, what's next for you? You've got these wonderful books.
Well, I
out,
must say that the
restaurants.
restaurant stuff is a lot of fun for me.
Oh, I can tell.
And seeing people eat food that I've cooked all my life and really loving it, that makes me very, very happy. And I think the potential, I'd love to see those restaurants be teaching centers. We sometimes hold classes and cooking demonstrations. I think the potential of that to change lifestyle is very great.
Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Weil. And thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.